In late 1981, the small Scottish town of Johnstone was shocked by the brutal murder of a popular 16-year-old schoolgirl who was found strangled to death with a length of twine around her neck in a wooded area just a few hundred meters from her home. A local 19-year-old, known for habitually exposing himself to young girls, quickly became the prime suspect. He would go on to be convicted following 2 confessions which he later retracted, claiming they were beaten out of him by investigating officers. There was nothing in the way of physical evidence identifying him as the killer, and both of his confessions were riddled with inaccuracies. Further doubt was cast over the conviction when a second murder victim was found beaten and strangled to death 2 years later, only half a mile from the first crime scene. The only person ever arrested in connection with the second murder, a relative of the victim, had all charges dropped and mysteriously vanished 2 decades later. Welcome to the Crime Portal. These are the cases of Pamela Hastie and Tracey Waters. By 5 p.m. on Wednesday, the 4th of November 1981, it was already dark in the small Scottish town of Johnstone, which is located in Renfrewshire, roughly 12 miles west of Glasgow. Parents James and Christine Hastie were becoming increasingly concerned that their 16-year-old daughter, Pamela, had yet to return home from school. The teen attended the now demolished St Cuthbert's High School, which was less than half an hour's walk from the family's house on Tower Road. The school day was finished by around 3 p.m, and it was extremely out of character for their daughter not to inform them of any plans she had or where she would be going. That evening, the worried parents notified police that Pamela was missing. As the sun began to rise the following morning on Thursday the 5th of November, Police Sergeant John Ross was scouring Rannoch Woods, a small area of mature woodland densely populated by tall beech and sycamore trees, situated between the Hastie family home and the school which Pamela attended. Something caught the officer's eye off the beaten path, a black shoe. As he approached, he noticed a school bag on the ground, with educational books scattered beside it. Sergeant Ross's next discovery would be one that haunted the community of Johnstone for decades to come, as he came across the lifeless body of Pamela Hastie. She was partially clothed and crudely covered with leaves in the undergrowth of the woods, just a few hundred meters from her home. Pamela was the second eldest of the Hasties' 4 children. The popular teen was a member of the school's debating society. John McLoone, rector of the school, would later tell the Daily Record newspaper, quote, "Pamela was a model pupil. She was bright, well-mannered and keen on music and sport. She was a credit to her parents and St Cuthbert's. In a cruel twist of fate, the woods within which Pamela would be found murdered was a place she enjoyed spending hours of her free time." Her mother Christine told the Daily Record, quote, "Pam loved to walk through Rannoch Woods to study the trees and bushes. She spent hours at night drawing flowers in her scrapbook. Pamela's body was carefully removed from the scene in order for a post-mortem examination to be conducted by pathologists Dr. Walter Weir and Dr. William McLay. It was determined that Pamela had sadly been the victim of a violent sexual assault, and her body showed signs of defensive wounds. The cause of death was identified as asphyxia, caused by twine being wrapped around her neck. It was wrapped so tightly that it had to be cut off. The time of the attack was estimated to be between 3 and 4 p.m. as Pamela made her way home from school. Dr. Weir believed the victim would have died within seconds and described it as one of the most ferocious stranglings he had ever seen. The level of violence used by the perpetrator was echoed by the man tasked with leading the murder investigation, Detective Superintendent James Brown, who told the media the day after Pamela's body was discovered, quote, "This was a particularly brutal killing, which was sexually motivated. Investigators didn't have to wait long for their first suspect to emerge, as a witness contacted police to inform them she and a friend had spotted a man exposing himself in Rannoch Woods. close to the scene of Pamela's murder the day before the crime occurred. 2 days after Pamela's body was discovered on Saturday, November the 7th, this individual was identified as 19-year-old Raymond Gilmour. The teenager walked into Johnstone police station and freely admitted to indecent exposure. It wasn't the first time either. He'd committed the act over 40 times during the previous 2 years. When asked to account for his whereabouts on the day of the murder, Gilmour claimed he had been nowhere near Rannoch Woods. Nevertheless, investigators took the decision to search the home which Gilmour shared with his mother Christina and 2 brothers, Gordon and David. The family lived on Hawthorne Avenue, a stone's throw away from the woods, and a street directly behind Tower Road, where the Hastie family lived. Investigators recovered adult magazines from Gilmour's bedroom, similar to ones recovered from Rannoch Woods. More alarmingly, police had also found a number of receipts within Rannoch Woods from a petrol station at which Gilmour worked. Scribbled on the back were erotic fantasies, deemed to match Gilmour's handwriting. DCI Bill McMath examined Gilmour's hands and face for scratch marks that could have been caused by the victim during the attack. He showed no signs of being involved in a physical altercation. Dr. McLay carefully examined Gilmour's hands for any sign of frictional burning that could have been caused by pulling tightly on rough twine, but also found nothing. 2 days after Gilmour's admittance, on Monday the 9th of November, he was charged with indecent exposure and remanded into custody. That afternoon, he was once again questioned by DS James Brown about Pamela Hastie's murder. Gilmour reiterated that he had nothing to do with the crime. Following the interview, Gilmour was escorted back to his cell by officers DS Dennis Mayer and DC Alexander Love, who'd been drafted in from the Strathclyde Serious Crime Squad to assist with the investigation. Despite having shared nothing of any relevance with regards to the murder thus far, Gilmour was suddenly overcome with an urge to make a startling confession. According to the officers, he stopped walking, put his hands in front of his face, and began to cry, before stating, quote, "I can't go on like this, I'll have to talk." DS Mayer asked Gilmour if he was referring to the murder. The 19-year-old apparently nodded his head in response several times. He was escorted by the pair of officers back to a meeting room for further questioning, which was noted by DS Mayer. It reads in part as follows. "This would be about 3:30 p.m. I knew the school didn't come out till 4 p.m, so there wouldn't be anyone in the area until about 4:10 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. I was in a more bushy area than the trees. I was masturbating as I didn't expect anyone to appear there or arrive. I think the next thing I realized was a girl whom I recognized but didn't know her name. I jumped at her because I thought she knew me. I knocked her down and fell on top of her. She was screaming and shouting. I tried to quieten her. I put my hands over her mouth. I picked up a piece of branch lying on the ground and I hit her with it. I tried to have sex with her, but I didn't manage properly. I remember pulling at her tie or the strap of her bag or something slim, a belt or something. She calmed down quite a lot. I held the thing on her neck for a length of time, but I couldn't be specific. I got up and left her. If I can get the help I need to get rid of this feeling, I'll be glad. I mean, that girl had a long life to live if I hadn't ended it. I'm sorry about it." Gilmour further cooperated by drawing a map for interviewing officers, which detailed the scene of the crime and the position from which he attacked his victim. Gilmour's answers were generally vague, and in reality, inconsistent with the evidence. Pamela was strangled using a piece of twine, not a tie, bag strap or belt, and the sexual assault on Pamela was noted as being particularly violent, not indicative of somebody unable to perform. There were also no marks on the victim's face to suggest somebody had covered her mouth. Notably, this confession wasn't signed by Raymond Gilmour. Later the same day, Gilmour was once again interviewed by DS James Brown, alongside DCI Bill McMath. Once again, Gilmour's statements were inconsistent with the evidence police had. In addition to the mistakes in his statements to the previous two officers, he incorrectly described Pamela's clothing worn at the time of her murder. He claimed to have hit Pamela several times with a tree branch, although the post-mortem identified no significant injuries to the head. Gilmour was also unable to accurately describe the precise location Pamela's body was found, despite being familiar with Rannoch Woods. DS Brown pressed the teenager as to whether or not he was telling the truth. In response, Gilmour said, quote, "I didn't kill the girl, I only made it up to please the other police." Brown and McMath concluded Gilmour had lied when he confessed to the murder. They took the decision to terminate the interview and not pursue charges. The following day, on Tuesday the 10th of November 1981, a reported 1,000 people packed out St Aidan's Church, which is situated at the edge of Rannoch Woods, to pay their final respects at a requiem mass. Hundreds more members of the local community lined the 2-mile route to Abbey Cemetery in nearby Elderslie, where Pamela was laid to rest. The investigation continued, with police working around the clock to uncover new leads. On Tuesday, the 17th of November, DCI Bill McMath told the Daily Record that more than 2,000 members of the local community had been interviewed. This resulted in police appeals for a number of men to come forward. DCI McMath described one of these men as, quote, "aged about 40. He was wearing a blue parka jacket and green V-necked jersey. More importantly, he was red-faced, with perspiration and panting while running from Rannoch Woods." It would later be revealed that police were made aware of this man by a van driver who was startled when the man ran straight in front of his vehicle. The man reportedly shouted at the driver before taking off. A second individual wearing a black coat was described by McMath as, quote, "about 40, and in addition to the coat, he was wearing black, highly polished shoes." Police had also appealed for a man aged between 50 and 60, seen in Rannoch Woods at around 1 p.m. on the Wednesday Pamela was killed. He is described as having silver hair and was wearing a donkey-type jacket. Finally, police appealed for a man with reddish hair seen close to the murder scene on the day the atrocity took place. It remains unclear whether or not any of these individuals were ever traced. Fear intensified amongst the Johnstone community as the month of November progressed. A number of other attacks on women and girls led many residents to believe there was a serial offender operating in the area. On the 18th of that month, a 17-year-old who was visiting the town from Glasgow with her mother made the decision to go out to a local chip shop. As she walked down a narrow lane off Lake Artside Street in the centre of the town, roughly a mile from Rannoch Woods, a man grabbed her and forcefully dragged her into a scrapyard. He punched the girl and slashed at her with what was only described as a sharp object, whilst threatening to kill the teen if she made a sound. The brave girl fought off her attacker and ran off screaming. Her cries were heard by the scrapyard night watchman, who comforted the victim while they waited for an ambulance to arrive. The attacker was described in the Daily Record as a man around the age of 40 wearing a long coat. The same newspaper gave a different description of the assailant in the following days. 25 years old, about 6 feet tall, light hair with a side parting. Police publicly refused to rule out a link to the murder of Pamela Hastie, going as far as to conceal the identity of the latest victim, fearing her attacker may seek to silence her. 2 days after the attack, there was another incident. An 18-year-old was walking alone at 4:45 p.m. in Thomas Shanks Park. Within a few hundred meters of the spot, Pamela Hastie was found murdered in Rannoch Woods. The latest victim was jumped on from behind, but thankfully managed to escape unharmed. DS James Brown told the media, quote, "Fortunately, she managed to strike her assailant with her elbow and the man made off. He was said to be between the ages of 40 and 45, around 5 feet 10 inches tall, medium build, greying hair, and wearing a dark jacket." It was reported that detectives believed there was a definite link between the two latest attacks, and possibly the murder. A third victim came forward just days later. A 30-year-old woman fought off an attacker on the outskirts of the town at midnight. She was able to escape after repeatedly hitting her attacker in the groin. This victim also described the offender as a man in his 40s wearing dark clothes. DCI Bill McMath told the media, quote, "Until we find Pamela's killer, we cannot discount any link. The perpetrator or perpetrators of these attacks do not appear to have been identified." As December 1981 began, the string of attacks in Johnstone appeared to stop, but the hunt for Pamela's killer continued. D.S. Brown revealed to the media that 2 items belonging to the victim were still yet to be discovered: an olive green coloured hair comb and a pair of clear framed glasses that Pamela had borrowed from her mother for a school Halloween party. By January 1982, there were no new leads in the investigation, and the decision was made to remove DS James Brown and his team from the case. They were replaced with a new team led by head of the Serious Crime Squad, DS Charles Craig. DS Mayer, the man responsible for extracting Raymond Gilmour's confession a few months earlier, was the only officer retained as part of DS Craig's team. The original team, led by DS Brown, were not convinced of Raymond Gilmour's guilt. However, DS Craig was of the opinion that Gilmour's confession was genuine, despite the inconsistencies in his statement when compared against the evidence. Gilmour was in custody at Longrig End Remand Unit awaiting sentence on the indecent exposure charge, and was due to appear at Paisley Sheriff Court on February the 9th to be sentenced. Strangely, Gilmour was not conveyed by the usual prison transport that morning. Instead, a pair of detectives were instructed by DS Craig to collect him and transport him in a standard police car to Paisley Police Office. According to these officers, whilst in transit, Gilmour said, quote, "If I go to the court today, will they still want to see me about the murder?" When asked by the officers to clarify what he meant, Gilmour responded, quote, "It's about the statement I made about the murder when I admitted it, because I have never been charged or anything." It should be noted that Gilmour later disputed this account, insisting that the officers had pulled over in a lay-by and barraged him with questions whilst implying he was guilty of the murder. Upon arrival at Paisley Police Office, Gilmour was taken to be interviewed by DS Craig and DS Mayer. He was shown the map he had previously drawn, and according to DS Craig, it wasn't long before Gilmour once again confessed to the murder of Pamela Hastie. The interview was brought to an end so that Gilmour could be taken to court for sentencing on the indecent exposure charge. He was placed on probation and ordered to undergo psychiatric treatment. Immediately after, Gilmour was taken back to the police station and charged with the rape and murder of Pamela Hastie. Gilmour then had the opportunity to speak with his solicitor and professed his innocence, once again stating that he had falsely confessed that morning. The following day, Gilmour was returned to Paisley Sheriff Court and was remanded back into custody while a trial date was set. The trial began at Glasgow High Court in June 1982. Raymond Gilmour pleaded not guilty on the grounds he had an alibi. The Crown case was based on the evidence of the confessions, which were incorrectly alleged to disclose special knowledge, evidence obtained by the pathologists, and the circumstantial evidence of the graphic magazines found at the crime scene. Gilmour testified that the confession he initially gave to DS Dennis Mayer and DC Alexander Love was given after the officers attacked him while escorting him back to his cell. He said that he had made the sketch map on the basis of his observations of an area that police had been guarding after the murder, which was close to his home. When asked by Mr. Donald Macaulay, QC, defending, about what happened during his second confession to DS Charles Craig, Gilmour stated, quote, "I wasn't cautioned, I was accused of murder and I denied all knowledge of it, and I was called a liar. Craig said he would kick me up and down the room." When DS Mayer took the stand to be questioned by the defense, he stated it was his belief that details within Gilmour's confession had never been made public. However, when presented with newspaper articles about the murder, he conceded they had. DS Charles Craig told the court that the police were wrong to release the defendant without charge in November 1981. He discussed that adult magazines similar to those found at the scene were also found in the accused's bedroom, yet there was nothing to prove any of these belonged to Gilmour. DS Craig also informed the court that the string used to strangle Pamela Hastie was similar to string sold in the petrol station where Gilmour worked, yet this was a very common type of twine, sold in a variety of places. It should be noted that while the receipts covered in handwritten erotic fantasies found in Rannoch Woods were indeed written by the defendant, they were reportedly found in the opposite side of the woods to where Pamela's body was discovered. There was in fact no physical evidence to link Raymond Gilmour to the crime whatsoever. Both pathologists, Dr. Weir and Dr. McLay, gave evidence at the trial. They were questioned as to whether or not Gilmour's confession aligned with the results of the post-mortem examination they had carried out. During his first confession to DS Mayer, Gilmour was alleged to have admitted hitting the victim with a piece of branch. In his interview with DS Brown later the same day, he was alleged to have stated he hit the victim, quote, 3 or 4 times with a thick branch I could hardly get my hand around. The post-mortem indicated the victim had suffered minor head injuries and there was no damage to the brain. In his summary, the trial judge, Lord Dunpark, asked the jury to consider if Raymond Gilmour's confession that he hit Pamela with a tree branch was consistent with the medical evidence. He highlighted the fact no forensic evidence linked Gilmour to the rape and murder of Pamela Hastie, and that the case rested on whether or not they believed he had confessed voluntarily. The jury were instructed that if they found the first confession to be inadmissible due to the use of violence or the threat of it, they must also find the second confession inadmissible. The 6-day trial concluded as the jury retired to deliberate. Following a member of the jury being taken ill, the number was reduced from 15 to 14 people. 3 hours later, they returned with their decision. Raymond Gilmour was found guilty of the rape and murder of Pamela Hastie by a majority verdict of just 8 to 6. Gilmour was sentenced to life in prison. Pamela's parents spoke to the media following the conviction. Her mother Christine stated, quote, I know Pamela is in heaven and happy, but even knowing that does not make her loss any easier to bear. Pamela's father James added, quote, we don't feel any particular feelings of hatred or revenge. That will do no good now. Raymond Gilmour continued to protest his innocence from behind bars, and in December 1982 he launched an appeal against his conviction with the help from his lawyer, Ronnie Bain. He argued that his confessions were littered with inconsistencies, but the appeal was dismissed. Dissatisfied with the outcome, it was announced that Gilmour would appeal to the European Court of Human Rights, alleging that the police had violated his rights during the investigation. Gilmour also asked for a lie detector and hypnosis to prove his innocence. Meanwhile, the town of Johnstone was rocked by the savage murder of another young girl. Ronnie Bain said at the time, quote, all we are hoping for just now is that something in this present murder case may prove my client's innocence. On the evening of Monday the 14th of February 1983, 29-year-old Margaret Waters returned to her home on Johnstone's Craigview Avenue, which she shared with her two children, 11-year-old Tracey and 10-year-old Brian. She instantly became alarmed upon realizing her daughter wasn't in the house, and rounded up members of her family that helped to search the area. With no sign of the missing 11-year-old, police were alerted and began their own search. Tragically, Tracey was found dead at around 8 a.m. the following morning. Her partially clothed body was found beneath a hedge in the garden of a property on Shanks Crescent, just a mile from both the Waters family home and Rannoch Woods, where Pamela Hastie's body was found less than 2 years earlier. The child had been beaten, and the cause of death was determined to be strangulation. Wanting to spare Margaret the additional agony of identifying her daughter's body, Tracey's uncle, 26-year-old Adam McDermott, volunteered. The media was quick to draw parallels between the murders of Tracey Waters and Pamela Hastie, due to both victims being found partially clothed and strangled to death in such close proximity. A week following the tragic discovery, on Tuesday the 22nd of February, mourners packed out St. John's Church to say their goodbyes to Tracey. Following the service, locals lined the streets as Tracey was driven to her final resting place at Abbey Cemetery. In an extraordinary coincidence, only 2 graves separates those of both Tracey and Pamela Hastie. As the hunt for Tracey's killer intensified, witnesses came forward to say they'd seen the young girl looking for her mother at the Burnside Tavern pub on Quarrelton Road. A dog walker also came forward to claim he'd seen a man running through bushes close to the crime scene. This man was described as 20 to 25 years old, 5 feet 10 inches tall, and wearing a parka jacket. 18 days after the discovery of Tracey's body, it was announced that a man had been detained in connection with the murder. In a shocking twist, it was revealed the following day that this individual was Tracey's uncle, 26-year-old Adam McDermott. The married father of 2 was brought to Paisley Sheriff Court on March the 7th, 1983, and charged with his niece's murder. McDermott was accused of punching Tracey in the face, grabbing her, attempting to remove her clothes, and killing her by compressing her throat. He entered no plea and was remanded into custody. McDermott spent 77 days in Glasgow's Barlinnie prison before it was announced he would be freed pending further investigation. Reports suggest there was insufficient evidence to go to trial, but it was noted the murder charge was not officially dropped. Under Scotland's Criminal Justice Act, the accused can be released and brought up on the same charges within 12 months of their first court appearance. If a trial has not commenced within the 12-month period, the accused must be discharged and cannot be prosecuted again for that offence. McDermott offered a few brief words upon his release, telling the media, quote, "I am delighted that I have been released, but my lawyer has asked me not to go into any details. My wife has stood by me all the time and visited me every day." Lord Advocate James Mackay, who made the order to release McDermott, told the media he had 3 options: hold a trial within the next 33 days, release McDermott without charge, or release him with the chance of serving an indictment within a year of his first court appearance. 1 year after his first court appearance in March of 1984, Adam McDermott was relieved of the charges against him. He spoke to the media about the tough year he'd faced in limbo. Quote, "I feel I have proved my innocence, but I am still going through a living hell. Johnstone is a small area. I have been attacked and reviled because of something which I did not do." He said he'd been supported by his sister, Tracey's mother. Quote, "She thinks it is terrible. She said from the start she knew I could not do anything like that." McDermott claimed that after his first arrest, he gave his lawyers full details of his movements at the alleged time of the murder and provided witnesses who supported him. No other suspects would ever go on to be arrested in connection with Tracey's murder, and the case, sadly, became cold. Although the search for Tracey Waters' killer ultimately did little to support Raymond Gilmour's innocence, his legal representatives continued to push for an appeal. His lawyer, Ronnie Bain, told newspapers that he was still hopeful his client would be freed, telling the Paisley Daily Express, quote, "I am still optimistic. After an appeal to the Commissioner for the European Court of Human Rights was returned, suggesting we further look into more avenues of the case, we reapplied. That was 18 months ago, and we are still waiting." The application stated that Gilmour was deprived of the opportunity to exercise his right in terms of being able to consult with and obtain the advice of his solicitors. Gilmour's mother, Christina, remained adamant that her son was wrongly convicted. She continued to visit him at Sawton Prison and told the same newspaper, quote, "I pray to God for his freedom. I write 2 or 3 letters to Raymond each week, and he writes back the same number of letters. It's a chunk of my son's life." By 1992, Raymond Gilmour had been behind bars for a decade when it was announced that a new witness had come forward. It was alleged that an unnamed English lorry driver convicted of serious sexual offences against young girls was spotted near the murder scene on the day Pamela Hastie was killed. 3 further witnesses came forward to confirm these accounts. Gilmour's new lawyer, Gordon Ritchie, appealed for anyone else to come forward if they had information. Paisley South MP Gordon McMaster also joined the push for a retrial. After visiting Gilmour in prison, McMaster told the media, quote, "After speaking to him, I'm convinced there is a reasonable doubt. New evidence is now available, and I believe the case should be reopened." Both McMaster and Ritchie raised the issue with Secretary of State Ian Lang. Public interest in the case was mounting, prompting a number of interviews with Raymond Gilmour himself. Speaking to the Daily Record about his first confession, the then 31-year-old said, quote, "They took me to a cell and punched and kicked me and said this would go on until they got a confession. They were convinced I was the guilty man. I said anything just to make them stop hitting me and thought it wouldn't matter because there would be no evidence to back it up. There couldn't be. It wasn't me." In reference to his second confession, Gilmour stated, quote, "We went to the Paisley police office and I met Detective Superintendent Charles Craig. He said I would be kicked up and down the room if I didn't confess. I was smacked about the head and pushed about. I had enough. Basically, I said I did commit the crime just to get peace." Whilst hopefully awaiting the decision of a pardon or retrial, Gilmour tasted some sense of freedom in August 1993. Accompanied by an officer, he was allowed out of prison for 4 hours to visit his mother as part of a Training for Freedom scheme, which aims to help approved inmates reintegrate into society. By the start of 1994, Gilmour was still waiting for a decision. However, in April of that year, Scottish Secretary of State Ian Lang ruled against both a pardon and a retrial, devastating Raymond Gilmour and his mother Christina. Mr. Lang told the media, quote, "There is nothing to indicate that a miscarriage of justice has taken place." Surprised about the decision, MP Gordon McMaster said, quote, "We expected, in the view of the new evidence, a pardon would be granted." Just a few months following Mr. Lang's ruling, it was announced a TV program which investigated alleged miscarriages of justice would be looking into the case. Channel 4's Trial and Error. The hour-long program aired in September of 1994. The creators of the program spoke to a number of witnesses and several experts. Forensic psychologist Dr. Eric Shepherd read over the case files and determined Gilmour to be eager to please investigators during his confessions, noting they did not align with the evidence police had. Dr. Shepherd also raised questions about the accuracy of the map Raymond Gilmour drew, claiming that too didn't match the forensic evidence. Furthermore, Dr. Shepherd highlighted the fact the map appeared to have been drawn by multiple sets of hands. For example, the letter E seen here in the word tower is a lowercase, almost childlike letter. The double E on the word tree is uppercase, yet curved. The E in the word Pamela is noticeably more straight. The word rannoch is also spelt both correctly and incorrectly on the same diagram. This raises the question, was the map largely drawn out on Gilmour's behalf to incriminate him? Forensic scientist Dr. Angela Gallup told the trial and error team that she didn't believe the evidence supported Gilmour's guilt. She highlighted the fact that the clothes Gilmour had worn on the day of the murder were covered by many thousands of paint specks, the direct result of his work sanding down part of his car on the afternoon of the murder. There was no cross-transference to the victim's clothing, neither was there any cross-transference of blood, tissues, or textile fibers. This would be impossible had Gilmour been responsible for such a physical, close-range attack. At the time of the program, Dr. Ian West was widely regarded as Britain's leading criminal pathologist. Dr. West reviewed the post-mortem findings for trial and error. He stated, quote, "There is no evidence of any substantial blow to the head. There is a 1-inch scratch on the left side of the frontal region of the scalp. In other words, the forehead region of the scalp. Some blotchy hemorrhage in the scalp at the vertex, which is the top of the head. These are tiny hemorrhages and deep inside the scalp, commonly seen in cases of strangulation. There is no mention of any heavy bruising of the scalp tissues at all. The other finding was the presence of bleeding into the left petrous temporal bone, which lies in the base of the skull, immediately inside the ear. Hemorrhaging of the petrous temporal bone is a common finding in strangulation." Dr. West also highlighted other evidence buried within the original pathologist's report. On Pamela's hands were clear signs of defensive wounds, typical of a victim trying to grab the blade of an assailant's knife. This was a significant revelation, as no mention of a knife had ever been alluded to since the murder took place, and, crucially, neither of Raymond Gilmour's confessions included any mention of a knife. The trial and error team also sought to answer the question of who may have been responsible if Raymond Gilmour was not the culprit. To do this, they spoke with a number of witnesses. The day before the murder, Pauline Bain and her friend Susan McManus were walking through Rannoch Woods when they encountered a man exposing himself, later confirmed to be Raymond Gilmour. On the day of the murder itself, Pauline had been walking alone through the woods, not far from where Pamela Hastie would be killed 30 minutes later. She was startled by a man watching her, so frightened that she ran from the woods to safety. These encounters were described to police in a witness statement by Pauline following the murder. According to the statement, this was the same man, Raymond Gilmour. However, Pauline told the trial and error team that she was now adamant the man she saw on the day of the murder was closer to the scene of the murder than the witness statement implied, and crucially, this man was not Raymond Gilmour. Pauline insisted that she told all of this to investigators at the time. She also told the trial and error team of an earlier incident which took place around a month before Pamela's murder. Pauline was once again walking through the woods with her friend when they were grabbed by a man who dragged them off the path. Thankfully, the girls managed to escape and ran away unharmed. Their attacker was carrying a knife. Although this attack was reported to police, nothing ever came of it. Their attacker was described as tall with red, shoulder-length hair. Pauline and Susan weren't the only ones in Johnstone worried about a red-haired man. The owner of a guest house bordering Rannoch Woods was becoming increasingly concerned about the behaviour of one of her regular lodgers. A statement by the guest house owner read in part, quote, "In the latter half of 1981, I had an arrangement with a firm whereby their lorry drivers would stay with me. I remember one of the drivers in particular. I would describe him as having long, red, sort of wavy hair. On the day of the murder, he was up throughout the day, and this was very unusual. Following day, all the newspapers published the description of somebody. It could have been him to a T. The following week, he'd shaved all his hair off. Later, I found he'd been sent to jail for interfering with his young daughter and niece. A few days before Pamela's murder, Mary Milne, who was 15 at the time, had an encounter with a lorry driver on a road which runs by the woods. She was interviewed by trial and error, stating the driver offered her a lift, which she declined. She described the man as having shoulder-length, ginger hair. In light of the new evidence highlighted by the program, Gordon Ritchie got to work on a renewed appeal on Gilmour's behalf. Ritchie commented to the Paisley Daily Express, quote, "We are talking about a case which has become a shambles. It is now a public disgrace. The evidence relating to the use of a knife could not be classed as new. Cuts to Pamela's hands were detailed in the original post-mortem, albeit they were not noted to have been defensive wounds caused by fending off a knife-wielding attacker. Because of this, they could not be considered. The witness statements, however, could be considered." Meanwhile, Scottish Secretary of State Ian Lang announced he would be establishing an independent committee to investigate possible miscarriages of justice. Retired Detective James Brown also commented publicly, stating, quote, "I was not convinced at the time by the so-called confession Gilmour gave two of my officers. My view has not altered since. Nothing he said convinced me that he ever had the knowledge of the killer." The appeal was tabled on Tuesday, the 13th of December 1994, and once again, Gilmour began the long wait for a response. In the meantime, Gilmour's troubling behaviour did little to help his cause. It was revealed in September 1995 that he was caught renting hardcore adult films to other inmates. A search of Gilmour's cell revealed a video recorder which he used to overwrite Open University VHS tapes with the adult material. As a result, Gilmour's application for day release to attend college classes was denied. The following year, in 1996, his application for day release was accepted, and he began attending classes at Edinburgh's Telford College. Foolishly, Gilmour exposed himself 4 times while outside the prison and was sentenced to 3 months. In the event his appeal was unsuccessful, this also hindered his chances of parole. In June of 1997, a decision was finally reached regarding Gilmour's appeal, and it wasn't the news he was hoping for. The new Scottish Secretary of State, Donald Dewar, rejected the bid. Dewar revealed that 3 witnesses changed the testimony they gave after being interviewed by his team. To the frustration of lawyer Gordon Ritchie, these statements were not shared by Mr. Dewar. Given the crime he was sentenced for, things were far from pleasant behind bars for Raymond Gilmour. In 1999, the Daily Record spoke with infamous organised crime figure Paul Ferris, who told the newspaper how he and fellow inmates tortured Gilmour behind bars. Ferris and his fellow imprisoned thugs, who nicknamed themselves the Glenakill Wolves, harboured a particular disdain for sex offenders, whom they referred to as beasts. Gilmour was reportedly scalded with boiling water mixed with sugar and repeatedly beaten. Ferris told the Daily Record, quote, "Gilmour and at least 5 other sex offenders were regularly attacked in the textile workshop at Glenakill. Every 5 minutes or so, one of the wolves would walk up to a beast and wallop him over the napper with either a piece of wood or an iron bar." The new millennium brought with it fresh hope for Raymond Gilmour's bid for freedom. In 2001, at the age of 38, having served 2 decades behind bars, he was granted leave to once again appeal his conviction. Then, in 2002, he was released pending the appeal court's decision. The Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission supported Gilmour's arguments, raising serious concerns about his conviction in a detailed report. They questioned the reliability of his confessions, noting that the psychological evaluations, witness statements, and absence of forensic evidence cast doubt on its validity. Without the confession, they concluded there would not have been enough evidence to convict Gilmour, leading them to suspect a possible miscarriage of justice. As with Gilmour's previous appeals, the process was not a quick one, and would not see a resolution for several more years. In the meantime, whilst awaiting the outcome, Gilmour once again repeated his disturbing habit of indecent exposure. In December of 2006, he was found guilty of flashing to a number of victims, ranging in age from 13 to 25, both male and female. On at least one occasion, Gilmour made suggestive remarks to school children whilst carrying out his sick acts. He was jailed for 30 months for the offences. The man responsible for sentencing Gilmour, Sheriff Donald Ferguson, stated, quote, "It is disgraceful that women and girls can't go walking on a summer's day without encountering this sort of crime. It is my belief that you are a real danger to women and young girls, and because of this, I am sentencing you to 30 months. The following year, in August 2007, the much-anticipated result of Gilmour's latest appeal was revealed. The conviction was quashed. The judgment predictably cited inconsistencies within Gilmour's confessions and a lack of physical evidence tying Gilmour to the crime. The Lord Justice Clerk, Lord Gill, who at the time was Scotland's second most senior judge, criticised non-disclosure of evidence of police violence against Gilmour and accused police pathologists of concealing evidence that Pamela Hastie had defensive knife wounds to her hands. Lord Gill said the two police pathologists, Dr. Walter Weir and Dr. William McLay, failed to tell the trial that Pamela had cuts on her fingers when Gilmour never mentioned or was accused of using a knife. Quote, "It is important evidence of the inadequacies of the post-mortem report and, by clearest implication, the lack of professionalism by Dr. Weir and Dr. McLay. There were no triumphant scenes in the courtroom, as Gilmour was returned to serve the remainder of his sentence for indecent exposure. However, he was released soon after. Given the lack of media coverage over the decade following Raymond Gilmour's release, it would appear that police were doing very little, if anything, to identify the man responsible for Pamela's murder. In 2018, BBC Radio Scotland produced a two-part programme taking an in-depth look at Raymond Gilmour's wrongful conviction. Gilmour, now in his 50s, was interviewed as part of the production, stating, quote, "I have dreams which take me back 20 years about being imprisoned. You wake up and wonder where you are because the dreams are so intense." Defense lawyer Gordon Ritchie spoke of his frustration at the lack of police action in regards to finding Pamela Hastie's murderer following Gilmour's quashed conviction. Quote, "10 years after Raymond Gilmour was released, police have done nothing to try and find out who actually committed this crime." Gilmour went on to speak with various newspapers about his life 10 years after becoming a free man. Quote, "I have had some compensation, but I don't want to say how much. It doesn't matter if it was 20p or £20 million. It doesn't replace 20 years. I can live on it. I've got a family. We can live on it. People might think it's strange for me to say I've been lucky, but in certain ways, I have been. I was lucky certain people had the beliefs they had, but you're damaged and you think, how does a damaged person help their kids to grow up?" A year later, in 2019, forensic scientist Angela Gallup, who reviewed the forensic reports back in 1994 on behalf of Channel 4's Trial and Error, released a book titled When the Dogs Don't Bark, A Forensic Scientist's Search for the Truth. Within the book, Professor Gallup looks back on some of the most prominent cases spanning her career of over 45 years, including that of Pamela Hastie. Back in 1994, Gallup was given no access to any physical evidence, but was allowed to comb through detailed forensic reports, including the post-mortem. She told the Daily Record in 2019, quote, "I would be happy to get a forensic team together and brief them on my knowledge of this case, what I did and saw at the time of my review, and help them in any cold case investigation. I do think that if you went back to look at Pamela's clothing, there would be something there in relation to DNA. Every contact really does leave a trace. It's just sometimes no one finds it or doesn't find it at that time. I have suggested looking at any superficial debris that may have been recovered from Pamela's body, especially the exposed parts. Something that had been noted by one of the police officers involved in the original investigation was a footwear mark on the ground, near where Pamela's schoolbooks had been discovered. Although a photo had been taken of what might have proved to be a vital piece of evidence, no attempt seemed to have been made to compare it with any of Gilmour's shoes. Also mentioned in the forensic report were a purple nylon fibre and 3 hairs that were found on the branch of a tree at the scene. The fact that all 3 of the hairs were apparently like Pamela's suggested she had come into contact with the branch at some point. So, if the fibre was associated with the hairs and, assuming it hadn't come from Pamela herself, one obvious explanation would be that it had come from her attacker. But that was another loose end that appeared not to have been followed up. In March 2023, it was announced that cold case detectives would be making a fresh attempt to identify the man responsible for Pamela's murder. A meticulous re-examination of her case was ordered by Lord Advocate Dorothy Bain, who was understood to be determined to make unsolved murders a priority whilst in the role of Scotland's senior prosecutor. It was revealed that samples from Pamela's body had either not been taken or not been stored. Police explored the possibility of exhuming Pamela's remains in an effort to potentially gain new forensic evidence that was not available in the early 1980s, but a later request was blocked by Pamela's remaining relatives. There have been no further updates in the hunt for Pamela's killer. Unfortunately, it also seems as if there will be no DNA breakthrough to assist in identifying the person responsible for the murder of Tracey Waters, as vital evidence from the crime scene was lost back in the 1980s. Tracey's mother, Margaret, has spoken out in recent years, stating she believes her brother, Adam McDermott, the only man ever charged, was the killer. McDermott's whereabouts are unknown. In October 2001, the divorced father of 2 left his home in Kilbarchan, saying he was going to the local post office and never returned. He has not been seen since. Relatives were convinced he was still alive and sent a parcel from the Helensburgh area, roughly 25 miles northwest of Johnstone, in 2003. In 2004, the Waters family urged police to look into the case, and a hunt for McDermott was launched. A sample of his DNA was obtained in an effort to match it with missing persons files. Hospital, employment, and financial records were examined, all of which proved unsuccessful. The same year, Margaret Waters had enlisted the help of Les Brown, a former detective who, at the time, ran the now-defunct Search for Justice organisation, which aimed to help those who felt they'd been let down by police investigations. Mr. Brown co-authored a book in 2013 titled Real Hard Cases, in which he claimed to doubt McDermott was responsible for killing his niece. His main reasons for coming to this conclusion involve the witness statement from a dog walker who claimed to have seen a man running through bushes close to the crime scene around the time Tracey's murder took place. The witness claimed this man was too tall to be Adam McDermott. Mr. Brown also theorized that McDermott would have been covered in scratches as a result of running through the bushes, and displayed no such injuries at the time. Finally, he claims a footprint found near the scene caused by the running man was discovered to be a size 10, 3 sizes greater than McDermott's size 7 feet. Mr. Brown stated that according to Johnstone's CID, there was another suspect who was interviewed that did display scratches and wore size 10 shoes. Although the individual was able to explain away these potentially incriminating factors, Mr. Brown claims, quote, "Some locals still seem to believe he was the guilty party." As to whether or not McDermott was still alive, Mr. Brown claims he was informed by an ex-associate of the suspect that he was shot and buried in a shallow grave. although Mr. Brown stated he did not believe this to be true. Police have stated it is their belief that McDermott has since taken his own life. However, his sister and Tracey's mother, Margaret, does not. She told the media in 2020, quote, "Anyone can disappear if they want to. I believe he's hiding, and someone must know something." Over the years, the murders of both Pamela Hastie and Tracey Waters have been linked to several high-profile offenders. Scottish serial killers Peter Tobin and Angus Sinclair have both been mentioned as possible suspects by the media. Both died in prison for sexually motivated murders, and both are widely believed to have more victims. Notably, Johnstone was Peter Tobin's place of birth, so he would have been familiar with and had ties to the area. However, police don't appear to have formally discussed either of these degenerates as suspects. The most intriguing high-profile offender that has been discussed as possibly being linked to either case is the serial killer and child abuser Robert Black. Black was convicted in 1994 and sentenced to multiple life terms for 3 sexually motivated murders committed in the 1980s. He would later go on to be convicted of a 4th murder in 2011, 5 years before his death in 2016. Robert Black is believed by many to have committed further atrocities, not just in the UK, but also across Europe due to his occupation as a delivery driver. You may recall that earlier we discussed a tip given to police by a van driver following Pamela Hastie's murder. The driver collided with a man that was running from Rannoch Woods, a man that was never traced. The driver of that van is now known to be a man by the name of Andrew Henderson. In addition to the murder of Tracey Waters, Les Brown's book, Real Hard Cases, also explored the Pamela Hastie murder. Mr. Brown tracked down Andrew Henderson to hear his story of the running man. When Mr. Brown asked Mr. Henderson if he had seen the individual again, he replied by stating, quote, "Yes, I have seen him again since that day, on television. The man who ran into my van was Robert Black." Henderson told Mr. Brown that for a few seconds, the man he identified as Robert Black had his face pressed against the windscreen of his van, just 50 centimeters away from himself. Henderson described the man as aged around 40 with a heavy build. This description matches Black's, who would have been 36 at the time of Pamela Hastie's murder. Les Brown describes Andrew Henderson as, quote, "I have had a lot of experience in this area weeding out the chances from the real thing. Henderson was a solid witness." Frustratingly, Henderson claimed that his suggestion to take fingerprints left on his van by the man he believed to be Robert Black was declined by police. Les Brown also followed up on another tip given to him after being told that Robert Black and other lorry drivers used a bed and breakfast in Johnstone, the same bed and breakfast brought up in the 1994 trial and error program. Several locals confirmed that Robert Black was indeed known to use the establishment and also drink in a nearby pub. Les Brown passed his findings to Scottish police and was subsequently told they had ruled Black out as a suspect, as they claimed he was nowhere near Johnstone at the time of Pamela Hastie's murder. If, however, police are mistaken and Andrew Henderson's identification of Robert Black is correct, perhaps there is a chance that Black could have been responsible not only for the murder of Pamela Hastie, but also for the murder of Tracey Waters.
I'm not exactly proud of the way I feel towards young girls. Like, there's a part of me that knows I'm wrong, that knows that it's wrong, that I shouldn't be doing things like that, I shouldn't even be thinking things like that. But there's the other part that says, you like it, go on. driving along, I'd see a young girl. I'd get out and talk to her and try to persuade her to get into the van. And take her somewhere quiet.
Decades have passed, yet the murders of Pamela Hastie and Tracey Waters remain unsolved mysteries, clouded by wrongful conviction, lost evidence, and unanswered questions. Was a single predator responsible for both crimes, slipping through the cracks of two flawed investigations? Or were these tragedies the work of different killers, their crimes only linked by proximity and circumstance? What is certain is that justice has not been served, not for Pamela, not for Tracey, not for the families left behind, and not for the community of Johnstone. If you have any information that could assist either investigation, please contact the UK non-emergency number on 101. The Crime Portal is a channel dedicated to exploring lesser-known murder and missing persons cases. For further information on this case, or to submit a suggestion for future videos, please visit the Crime Portal website. And, as always, thank you for watching.